just need a TI launchpad.
Can't you see I'm busy here?
Don't be held hostage by the board order. Go to digikey.com to find thousands of boards in stock, all ready for immediate shipment.
Hey everyone, welcome to, it's May, and welcome to our second build of the year, our second project build for Make Live. My name is Tyler Weingartner, I'm the video producer here at Make Magazine. As always, I am joined by...
Swadia, I'm the community manager for Make.
And today, we are going to be building a Raspberry Pi Plex server. If you're not familiar with Make Live is the live series where we build projects live directly here in front of you. Sometimes things go wrong. Most of the time they go right. You can ask us questions, and we have a lot of fun. And by the end of it, we build a project. And of course, this series would not at all be possible without our friends at DigiKey Electronics. If you don't know who they are, DigiKey is a distributor of electronic components based right here in the U.S. When I mean electronic components, they will get you everything that you need to build this project. Everything from single board computers like this guy, the Raspberry Pi, to this is going to be a big mess. Pardon that. Microcontrollers like the Adafruit Feather boards and the various components with these. These are from an old project that didn't quite fully disassemble. All the way down to discrete components like resistors and capacitors and everything else you need to build your next electronic project. They ship super fast. In fact, I realized just last night that I need a component for a project that I need to finish before Maker Faire, sometime this weekend. So I'm having that shipped out today and looking forward to getting it tomorrow because I need it that quickly, so I have as much time to work with it as I have, because Maker Faire is just right around the corner. Anyhow, we are super lucky to be working with them, and we're grateful to have them be part of this project. Anyhow, the project that we're building today, as I mentioned already, is a Plex server that lives on this guy, this tiny single board computer called the Raspberry Pi. Now, what is Plex? Plex is it's a media server. So if you have backups of things like movies or TV shows that you have a local copy of rather than streaming it from a service like Netflix or Hulu or something like that, this is a place where you can serve it. It is a tiny computer that only runs off of USB power, so it doesn't draw a ton of power. We're going to be adding an external drive to it, so you have plenty of storage for your entire library. And the best part is you can not only play it to your smart TV or anything with a set-top box or connected app, but you can play it on mobile devices, browsers, basically anywhere you have an internet connection. You can get access to your media, and it's all routed through Plex's cloud, so you don't have to you don't have to set up your networking in your home to make sure you can broadcast out. It just handles all that stuff in the back end. It works really well. And as always, if you have any questions for me about this project, or about this build, or about working with the Raspberry Pi, just put those questions in the comment box, and we'll do our best to answer them. In fact, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit into this because I looked into the comments of the project that I wrote up on MakeZine.com. The author of one of the packages took me to task a little bit on some of the things here. And I'll be honest, I am kind of a kludge when it comes to Linux. I do a lot of things of exploring bits of code and kind of bashing it together until it finally gets something that works. He took me to task on some of the methodologies I was using. He obviously knows a lot more. Actually, I shouldn't even say he. I'm not even sure this person is. Their maintainer of one of the packages. They obviously know a lot more about this than I do. I'm going to be exploring some of their corrections, and I'll be updating it on MakeZine.com further down the road. In fact, we're going to be trying one of their suggestions about how to mount the hard drive live on this show. If I can't end up getting that working, we're going to go back and go do it the way I document it. But so we're going to have a little bit of excitement here. In the meantime, let's get into building this project. And one of the other first things I wanted to address is in the Raspberry Pi Skill Builder, we were talking about a piece of software called Pi Bakery. And we ran into a snag with using Pi Bakery to set up our SD card for Raspbian. And that was when you're setting up your Raspberry Pi Wi-Fi network, and I'm going to go to my computer here. We can take a look. Go to the network settings. Last time we were talking about this, you can set up your network name, you can set up your password, but the Raspberry Pi required you to accurately set your Wi-Fi country for it to be able to access a Wi-Fi network. And then hopefully you can see it. It's pretty small on the screen here. They added this extra dialog box where you could set that. So now you can have your Pi automatically jump onto the network on its first boot. And I mentioned that they will probably be sending that as an update, and now they have, and that's great. Other things we're going to be using here is just because it's going to be sitting next to a metal enclosure, I thought it would be a good idea. Pull the SD card out. The SD card already has the Raspbian software on here. I figured we wouldn't want to wait through installing it. Although we are going to have to do the full apt-get update and upgrade. So we'll have a little bit of downtime there, but we can use that time to start populating our hard drive with the media we want to include on there. Anyhow, I've also got this 3D printed sleeve case for the Raspberry Pi. This is my favorite Raspberry Pi case. You can find this on Thingiverse and then print it out. There's lots of other case options out there, but this is a good project to put your Pi into an enclosure, so you don't get any short circuits across any of these pins, because that would be bad for your Pi. Anyhow, let's... and we are also going to be working with this Pi completely headlessly today, because that's sort of the way you're going to be working with your Pi in this manner anyways. You don't really need to set up a keyboard monitor in the actual practical use of this project. So we'll just give it a little bit of a second to boot up here. Take that time to add in... Let's get a picture-in-picture going here so you can still see us.
So one of the other things I'm excited about is that we're going to be running Plex on this, correct?
Yes.
And Plex is one of my favorite media streaming platforms because you can basically run your own media streaming center in your house. And I don't actually like to sit and watch TV. I like to carry my iPad around and do things. So Plex has always been my preferred media streaming individual platform.
We'll forget about the picture-in-picture for now. Maybe we'll get some a little bit of time later on. We'll do that. All right, we don't need Pi Bakery here. So the first thing we're going to do is connect to the Pi via a piece of software called SSH. This is built into the terminal on Mac OS, which is what I'm using right now. If you are on Windows, they've just started including a full bash shell within Windows, so you can actually run. I'm not sure if it runs in like a virtual machine, or if it's just a bash interface for the sort of DOS layer that's in Windows. I haven't explored that too much yet, but you can also just use a fantastic piece of software called Putty. And it's just a piece of terminal software you can use to achieve the same thing that I'm doing through the terminal here. Anyhow, so we've signed into the Raspberry Pi, and the first thing we want to do is go into Raspberry config.
So we do have a quick question before we get started.
Yeah?
Are we using a Pi 3 or a Pi 3B Plus?
We are currently using the Pi 3B, and it's the same one that I'm using in my instance of this Plex server at home. I haven't tested out with the Pi 3B Plus. I have seen a couple of questions about the performance and the streaming capabilities of the Pi 3. And the short answer is, I mean, it's not tremendously high just because the Pi doesn't have a huge amount of horsepower. So as you're encoding your media files, you want to be considerate of what you kind of want your streaming output to be, because it can't really do much in the way of transcoding. That's when you have, say, a high bitrate file and say a low bandwidth connection. It can downstream that to a different format, or if you have some other oddball formats, like we have a couple of some of the media I'll be showing here today, or that I've brought in just to demonstrate, is in like AVI format. It's old media. It's in SD. And it works through that pretty well. It plays that back excellently. I wouldn't expect that something that's in a bizarre codec that is in like 1080p or something like that. Your best bet is to encode your media. What I've found at about 1080p, H.264, and 30 or 24 frames a second, and maybe with a bit rate of like 2 to 2.5 megs per second. You aren't really compromising much on picture quality there, and the streaming performance is great. If you had a full Plex server running on a PC or something like that, you probably could be streaming to multiple devices at the same time. I haven't tried that with this. I wouldn't expect it would go terribly well. Anyhow, let's get back into this build. And really the most important thing we want to do while we're here in Raspberry config is we're going to be changing our change the Pi user password. And this is the thing that you should do with every single Raspberry Pi build you do. And that's because every Pi, as it, the Raspbian image ships from raspberrypi.org, the default username is Pi and the default password is Raspberry. That's a thing you know now. That's a thing that just about everybody on the internet knows. And that user has a tremendous amount of power on this system. They can mess up your Pi. They might even be able to do other nefarious things on your network. So first things first, make it at least a little bit hard for them, for any bad people getting access to your network, and change your password. All right, so now that's done. The next thing we need to do is we need to do the full OS update on this device. So and as we mentioned in the skill builder, sudo apt-get update is basically what updates the list of all the packages that there are updates for. So this actually doesn't modifying the software on your Raspberry Pi at all. What this is doing is just basically getting all the information about the update that it's about to download. The next command I'm going to do, and it's going to take a little bit longer, is the one where it actually updates the software. And that will take a little bit of time, so that we'll use that time to set up our hard drive. All right, update just finished. So now we're going to do sudo apt-get upgrade. And I'm actually going to make this text a little bit larger so you can see a little bit easier.
And we should remember to keep the window up so that they can see without the bar
Yeah,
getting in the way.
without the bar. Yep.
Looking good.
Let's go for 36. Oh, that's right. This doesn't like to update things. Hopefully this is easy enough to see. All right, but as I mentioned, the next thing we need to do is get our hard drive ready. And there's a couple of things to know about working with your hard drives here. I mean, here I've got just a standard 3.5-inch SATA drive in an easy-to-install enclosure. It just pops into there. You can, the other important thing about this enclosure is that it has this external power supply. If you have one of those hard drives that just powers off of USB, the Raspberry Pi does not have enough power to power it from its USB ports. So if you do have a drive like that, you need to power it through an external powered hub. So that's just a quick thing to know. But this one just has an external power supply, so now it has all the power it needs. So that the only thing the Raspberry Pi needs to worry about over its USB connection is just communicating with the drive. But in the meantime, I'm going to install this, or plug this into my MacBook here. And there's a little power key here on the enclosure. That's why it's not coming up. It's like, oh no, what happened? Did I kill it? Ah, that's right. They're USB. I already have a keyboard plugged into my MacBook, so it's used up all of its USB ports, but there's still one on the keyboard.
The hidden last USB port.
All right, so in the meantime, we've got this drive I have named Plex because I thought that would be a silly name for it. And let's see. My little thumb drive that has all my media here. Well, the first thing we can do here, worry about the thumb drive in a second. But it's generally a good idea to create separate folders for the different media types that you can serve up on your Plex server. So I'm going to go ahead and create a folder for movies, another one for TV shows. Third one, we're not going to be adding any music today, but this handles music really well. And last one for photos. If you have a nice photo library and you don't want to have them on any of the cloud services like Google Photos or Flickr or anything like that, this is another way you can store them locally and have access to those files anywhere you are with an internet connection.
BT Birch asked, why not dist upgrade? Upgrade everything.
Because I didn't know about dist upgrade. As I mentioned, I'm a bit of a kludge when it comes to Linux. I try to maintain that a little bit in the sense of if I can do this, you can easily be doing this. I've learned largely by cobbling together things from various tutorials over the years, and that's just built up to some muscle memory, probably some bad habits too. So that's why I didn't do dist upgrade. All right, so we have our folders here set up, and I'm going to let's see. Of course, I put everything in movies. So you can just move this data over to into the movies folder, and that way we'll be able to access this stuff when we get it mounted on our Raspberry Pi.
Now, say I wanted to put my home videos on there, but I didn't want them to mix up with the movies. Would there be a way that I could separate out kinds of videos?
Well, we'll get into this when we actually get into the Plex software, which is all driven from a website. You set up everything through a website, and so basically you create folders. So you had movies that you created at home or something like that. We would just create a separate folder for that, and it would do, and then you would just have those in a separate library. Essentially, it would recognize that they're video files and present them as video files should be. The only thing it won't do with them, and might be a little bit confusing, you have some settings you can toggle around for that, is Plex does what's referred to in a similar piece of software like this called scraping or metadata scraping, where it recognizes from the file name what piece of media it represents, and then downloads from the internet all the relevant information, such as in here I have a file for the 2015 film The Martian, and it would go and say The Martian and pull up the cover art from or the poster art from the film, and let me know that like Matt Damon and Jessica Chastain is in it, and then all that other relevant data. It won't do that with your home movies or any other media like that. In fact, although it might try and produce some hilarious results. I'm trying to remember, so I used to work on a video series a while ago called Lost Between Levels. I have one of those in my Plex server at home, and it translated into a Korean film called something, Secrets Between Lovers was what it translated that to. My wife and I were looking through the library, and she was like, "What is that?" I'm like, "I have no idea." And then we clicked it, and I'm like, "Oh, it's this show I used to work on." So, and I believe you can say we can toggle some settings for that. I can say, "Hey, don't bother looking on the internet for this data. It's fine. I know what this stuff is." But yes, short answer is yes. You can create media libraries for whatever kind of content you like.
Good project to deploy to your parents and grandparents, seated with videos of children.
Yes, that would be an excellent way of doing stuff like that. All right, all of our movie files have copied over, and now it is time to talk about TV shows, because they have some specific handling for things. I've only brought in shows that are single series, but I think we'll be able to communicate how this works. In that Plex has some guidelines for the way you name your files for TV shows, so they get organized appropriately into seasons and then episodes within that season. The short answer to that is basically you want to name stuff in the format of like S and then the double digit that represents the season number, and then E, and then another two-digit number, and then that represents what episode number that is within that series. So if you were, had the Expanse season 2 episode 5, you would do the Expanse SO2 EO5, and then it would go, okay, I know which episode this is and which season it is, and that just makes the library sorting a lot easier.
Shane Engel had a question as to whether this is a headless server because he got here a little late.
Yes, this is a headless server. I'm actually working on this Pi completely headlessly. This is the Pi that we're installing software on right now, and you can tell it only has one cord coming out of it. It eventually will have two. The other one will be for the hard drive. But otherwise, and I don't believe, well, there's probably a way if you want to use something like VLC. I don't believe there is a way through Plex to watch your content directly on a monitor plugged into this Pi. Instead, it would be streaming it over your network to your smart TV, your cell phone, to a web browser, or wherever you want to watch your content. But yeah, this is a completely headless build. And apt-get upgrade just finished. Exciting times. The next thing we need to do is look up the next step in the process. And this is a bit of a redundant step, but we need to install the HTTP transport package. I say it's probably redundant because it probably happened in the last step that we just did. In fact, it just confirmed that. You see here, in this line here, we see the following packages were automatically installed and no longer required. And so it's basically saying we're good. And then the next thing we need to do is install the dev today package, which includes all the pointers towards Plex. And the individual who took me to task over my write-up is the person who is also the individual who manages this package. So I take them at their word that they know what they're talking about. A couple other steps to do here. And then we need to do apt-get update again. This should be really quick. Or, well, comparatively quick.
Biotoxin was asking how long it takes to transcode, and I think this person was assuming that the Plex headless server is going to be doing the transcoding as well.
Again, I mentioned that you don't really want to be doing a ton of transcoding on the Plex server. I mentioned that some of the content I have here is in SD and in some odd codecs. It will be transcoding that, but because it's in standard def, it's not too taxing on the CPU. In general, you want to be the Raspberry Pi has a hardware H.264 encoder and decoder. So your best bet for your best performance is to have everything encoded in that format, and then at whatever resolution you want to see it at. I don't think it's too CPU taxing to downsample from 1080p down to 720. If you want to save bandwidth, say you're on your mobile device out and you don't want to use too much of your LTE data, whatever data network you're using, you want to be a little bit lighter on bandwidth. It should be able to handle that pretty well. But otherwise, I would plan on getting everything in the resolution that you want it to be ultimately seen at, which again, I recommend something like 1080p, H.264, with a bit rate of like 2 or 2.5 megs a second. It should be able to handle that reasonably well.
And Mancrafting TM, who also said hi to you,
Hi, Chad.
asked, I currently have all my movies on a hard drive that I watch through a smart TV. What is the advantage of Plex?
The advantage of Plex is that you'd be able to watch your content not just on your smart TV at home, but anywhere that you have access to the internet. So that's the biggest advantage of something like this. If that doesn't appeal to you, don't bother with any of this stuff. If you have a smart TV that can already see all of your content, then you're already good. I guess the other advantage there would be if you also have a music library, maybe you do want to listen to your music wherever you have an internet connection. You can do stuff like that. Again, this does music, photos, TV shows, movies. So it does a lot of different kind of things.
And you can install Plex server on smart tablets and phones, and you can have your server broadcast to those as well.
Yeah. So that's the advantage of this. All right, and so that package is done installing, and the next thing we need to do is actually install the Plex Media server. All right, we'll give that a little bit of time to run through. We'll leave it on here if we want to watch some progress bar watching. Yeah, I think this ready NAS package is what really takes the most amount of time. But fortunately, we've got all the content on our drive here, so we can go ahead and check everything from the computer.
Another person that showed up late asked, this is Joe DiNicola, is it possible to store and serve files from a NAS?
As long as you can mount the drive, as long as you can connect the drive directly, how to answer this? I mean, in a sense, you can actually run a NAS. If you can mount the files from your NAS into Linux, you should be able to do that. I am not absolutely confident about the performance of your NAS, and the throughput might be a bottleneck for streaming the files. Many NASs perform very differently. This volume, actually no, not this volume, but the hard drive that I have connected to my Raspberry Pi Plex server, I pulled out of an old, cheap network-attached storage that was really, really slow for serving content. So I'm actually getting better performance from the Raspberry Pi Plex server than I ever was through the NAS, but that's because the Plex server is benefiting from relatively new hardware of the Raspberry Pi versus I don't know, it's probably 7 or 8 year old hardware that was running the NAS system. If you have something more advanced, you probably actually get something pretty quickly. As long as you can access the content from any Linux devices, if it were a regular drive, it should work. Should work. All right, so we have our Plex software installed. The next thing I'm going to do is a little bit of a controversial step that the maintainer of the Dev Today package thought maybe not necessarily the best idea, and that is going into this config file and changing the user of the user that Plex runs as from a Plex user to just running as the Pi user. Again, I mentioned the Pi user is somebody has actually a fair amount of system power. So if somebody got access to that account, it could do things to mess things up on your Raspberry Pi system. But then again, this is a really easy system to build. So if anything terrible happens to it, it's annoying, but you'd probably be back up and running in the same amount of time that we're doing on this live stream. In fact, probably a little bit less because you won't be asking questions to an internet audience. Or maybe you might be. I don't know. I don't know how you live your life. All right, so that is set up. I'm going to look on into our next step here. Well, the next thing we need to do is reboot. Oh, I'm sorry, sudo reboot. And we can take this time to plug in our hard drive to our Plex server, because the very next thing we're going to do is mount the drive and make sure that all of our data is there. See if the Raspberry Pi is back up to connect to it.
Max, I'm going to say Pug, asks, is this only for videos and songs, or can I also store other files?
I don't know if you can use this as like an online file share. That is a good question that I am not sure I actually have an answer to. I haven't explored that. It may attempt to, you might be able to create a library of data that then it might try and, I'll tell you what, when we start setting up our Plex server, let's find out.
Yeah. Do some experimenting live.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, the only way I'd really know how to answer that question is by doing it the hard way. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what device name the Raspberry Pi is seeing this hard drive at. So we're going to do ls, and we're going to look in the dev directory. And because this is a USB device, those generally come in as SD. Different drives show up as different letters. So like if I plugged in another drive, this one is showing up as SDA, the next one would be showing up as like SDB, and the different partitions show up as different numbers. I know from working with this before, all the data that I'm interested in is on SDA2. So the next thing we need to do...
Well, why don't you show us how you would figure that out, though, if you didn't know that?
Again, I'm a bit of a kludge, so I mean, by default, I would look in SDA1, so I mounted that and didn't find any of my data there. But let's go through how we actually mount them. The first thing we need to do before we mount it is we need to create a mount point. And that basically is a directory. So we're going to mount it in media, and we're going to call the mounting point library, because it's our media library. And I actually need to tell the command I want to do, which is makedir or mkdir. And that came in without any errors. And then now we do sudo mount, and this is going to be dev / let's try and see what's in SDA1, and we're going to tell it to mount at media library. Okay, it seemed to think that was a good idea.
Now we're going to roll over there and check out what's going on.
And there's nothing there.
Weird.
Okay, probably because this is not the right stuff. So the next thing I want to do is I'm gonna use my up arrow to go back up to this command. I'm gonna change the. Actually, the first thing I need to do is unmount. I believe here I just need to do the place where I mounted it to. Okay. So let's now try and mount SDA2. Okay, so because this is fresh install of Linux, and I have this hard drive formatted as exFAT to make it easy to work with on my Mac or my MacBook here, I need to install the package for the exFAT file system. And the thing I really need to do there is I need to remember how to install it, because it's all just through apt-get update, but there's a specific package name.
This is a also completely normal Linux experience.
Yep.
The fun part of running Linux is trying to figure out when you break things or when things aren't working correctly. You just throw whatever you're finding into Google, and almost certainly we'll find somebody with that problem on a forum.
This is really the beauty of working with the Raspberry Pi, is yet you're really, really unlikely to ever encounter a problem that nobody has had before. So in this case, the package is called exFAT Fuse. So we're just going to punch that in there, wait for that package to get installed, and then we'll run that command again, and it'll all go just fine. Oops. Unless you tell it hi instead of yes when you say.
Know that hi is yes.
Not that kind of hi. That's HY. All right. So now we're going to try that again. And And there's all of our folders. And if we go into movies, we see all of our files that are ready to play. Now, we could just go into the Plex setup right now. But the first thing I want to do is set it, because right now the way this Pi is set up, I would need to do that mount command every time the Pi rebooted, and that's annoying. But that's not the way computers work. We should just be able to have it mount that drive every single time the Pi boots. And so that's the very next thing we're going to do. And the first way we're going to do it is going to be the way that is a little bit more difficult, and but apparently a lot more appropriate way to mount drives, which is actually using a Linux config file called fstab. We need to get a little bit of data about the device before we can do that. So let's do that first. The very first thing we need to do is get what's referred to as the block ID of the drive, because that's how fstab wants to address it. So the first thing we need is, or do, is this command, blkid and the name of the device. So we do /dev/sda2, and it did not return anything to me. Maybe I need to do sudo.
When in doubt, sudo.
There we go.
Yay!
And here we have, I'm just going to grab this. Probably want to get it with the quotes. Okay, and now we do /fs. I mean, I assume this is called fstab.
I like to say fstab because
That's the more fun way.
it's much more fun.
All right, and I'm wondering if I grab, because this has this part UUID, but let's see what happens when you just plug it in as is. What's the worst that could go wrong? All right, so there we have the device ID. We're going to tab over and then tell it the mount point is our /media/library. Next, we need to tell it the file system, and then we'll just say defaults. And now we will we'll reboot the system and see if our stuff is still there when we come back.
And I know we already covered this, but Jeremy F. asked, is this a Model B or a B+?
This is a Model B. I don't see any reason why this wouldn't run on a B+. In fact, you get a little bit more performance out of it because it is a little bit of a faster system. But otherwise, we're just using a B today because that's what we had on hand. In fact, actually, our friends at DigiKey suggest that we use we built this project around the 3B just because it's a little bit easier to get a hold of right now. Anytime there's a new Raspberry Pi, there's just a crazy rush on them. Everybody goes out and buys them, and it ties up the supply chain for a little bit. But there's plenty of Raspberry Pi 3s out there. This runs fine on it, so I wouldn't hesitate to run this on an original Raspberry Pi 3. But if you have a 3B, go ahead and use it.
Good. Make use of that extra processing power.
All right. See if we're rebooted yet. I think we should be. That's not my password. That's my password. All right. Let's see if I did the job right. I did.
Yay!
All right. Thank you, kind sir who maintains the Dev Today package. You harangued me into doing something right. All right, so now this drive is going to be mounted up every time we reboot the Pi. So the next thing we need to do is get into Plex and start setting it up. And the first time we do that, we're going to go to the IP address of our Raspberry Pi but then we go to a specific port. So basically, it's the IP address of our Raspberry Pi, which if you are already connected to it, you can get from ifconfig. And right now it'll I know this is running on the wireless LAN, so
We should swap to that camera so they could see, though.
you are right. So I just typed in the command ifconfig, and it just tells you all the network setup of every network interface your Pi has. In this case, I know it's running on WLAN 0, and so I have the IP address here. Otherwise, the tool that I always like to use is a mobile app that's available on iOS and Android called Fing, F-I-N-G, that just does a quick network scan. You should be able to find your Raspberry Pi's network IP address that way too. I use that tool all the time when working with Raspberry Pis because I always like to work with them headlessly. Anyhow, so we need to go to, is it 10.2.1.130, and then add in a port number that's port 32400/web. And it's taking a little bit of time. This is actually being served up on the Pi. The rest of the time that you are accessing the Plex web service, you're going to be going through a URL called plex.tv. I'm going to go ahead and sign in here, so we can come back to us really quickly here. You do need to create a account with Plex, and they will try and toss you a bunch of different options of paying for the service. I haven't had to pay for the service yet, although I did buy the Plex app, and that allows me to stream my content to my phone. There's a free version of it that it gives you a limited time experience so you can try it out, see if your network performance is up to snuff. But after that, you can pay, I think it was like $5 or something like that, which is a pretty small fee to pay to get access to all your media wherever you are.
Jimmy B has a great question. How many different streams at the same time can the Pi handle with Plex?
Well, we can always try and do a live demo of that. I haven't done very much with streaming to more than one device at once. Because the Raspberry Pi doesn't have a ton of horsepower, I wouldn't anticipate that it would go terribly well. But so far, this build has gone really smoothly. So let's break something. All right. So come back here, and we see that, like I said, it tries to toss you a couple different options here. We're going to ignore all of those. It says, "Great, we found a server."
Give it a friendly name.
We're going to call it Make Live is Cool, and so is DigiKey. And there's a little checkbox here that says, allow me to access my media outside my home. Yes, we do want to do that. Go ahead and full screen this here. Okay, and the very first thing we need to do, as it says here, is add a library. And we get a bunch of different options here for the types of media we want to do. I'm going to say that maybe adding in content from that aren't media files, maybe that won't work.
But you see, it does have other videos, so you could put home movies or whatever kind of other video stuff you have.
Yeah, I believe that's where you'd want to put content that you don't want to do the metadata scraping.
Yeah.
So the first thing we need to do is we actually need to tell it where on the Raspberry Pi our content is living. So we go, it starts off trying to look for things in your home directory. So you go to / and then go to media, library. Unable to load the contents of
Did we
library movies.
ever change
it
the
was
permissions on that?
It was just being slow.
Oh, okay.
And then we will add the library. Let's go ahead and add another library for our TV shows. and we basically just do the same thing. In fact, I think I could have, it was, from memory, recalling back from where we already were. Go to our TV shows folder, add that, and confirm that. And we see, you probably can't see it, so I'm going to pull it up here. This message now at the bottom, it was a little pop-up saying, hey, we're updating the media on this server. And that just means that it's going out to the internet and grabbing all the metadata to populate this with information. But in the meantime, we're going to go hit our next button here. And we're pretty much done with our server setup. Then we get back to this sort of web interface here. And this is what the interface looks like when you access this through the web. In fact, that URL bar is really small here, but I'm going to go to, instead of looking directly on the Raspberry Pi, I'm going to go to plex.tv. Going to go to launch. And now I'm looking at through the greater internet. It's still accessing all the content. We see it's still grabbing all with the little spinning wheel here. We see that it's still grabbing data from movies. But if we look at any of these,
and now I just want to confirm for people so they understand. This is now web servable from anywhere.
Yeah, and it's already
Plex URL.
It's already pulled in all the information from the internet for all this thing for Children of Men. I never realized Chiwetel Ejiofor was in Children of Men. I don't know why I didn't know that. Just a little surprise there. And then if we look under TV shows, it's still pulling in data from these two things. Like I said, I didn't want to bring in any of that full TV series libraries. So I just have these two short-run series. One is a fantastic, sort of not quite documentary series from HBO called From the Earth to the Moon. If you haven't seen it, it's a great series about how we got to the moon. And another that's a kind of motorcycle road trip thing called Long Way Round, featuring Ewan McGregor. They ride around the world on motorcycles, and it's a lot of fun. But you were asking about multiple streams. So let's go back to movies, and I am going to let's start The Martian here. I'm not going to play too much of it for obvious reasons, most of those being content ID, of course. All right, I'm going to switch. All right, you see that's playing? And now on my telephone, I'm going to pull up the Plex app. And we're going to try and watch something else on this same server. We're going to see what happens. As soon as I Plex, there we go. And let's play Truth in 24, which is a fantastic racing documentary, because I'm a nerd. All right, so
The Martian is still streaming.
Martian is still going. Turn the sound down here. It's hard to see. Well, you all can't see, but I'm actually am streaming to both at the same time. And it hasn't broken yet.
And it's relatively smooth.
Well, actually, how smooth is this? Okay, it is still pretty smooth. This first part of the thing here is just a lot of still images. I have seen some. I have seen Plex struggle a little bit with seeking around a bunch. Now we have some higher frame rate stuff because we see some on-screen action, but we can seek around a little bit more. There's a smoking racing man. And otherwise, go back to The Martian here really quick. We can seek to later parts. Actually, that's relatively
Pretty good.
fast. So I'm going to call this pretty much done. Boy, that might have been one of the easiest builds yet. So anyhow, this is a project that it's just a nice place to serve and store all of your media files. There's not really too much to it than that. It's probably one of the more useful Raspberry Pi projects you can build. Of course, you can build lots of really silly fun stuff, and we're definitely going to be doing a lot more of that later on in the year. But in the meantime, this is just, and because it's relatively simple and useful, I definitely recommend this as one of maybe the first Raspberry Pi projects you might want to get started with, because it's relatively simple. You do have to get your hands dirty with some Linux stuff, so you might have to overcome a little bit of frustration, but you get a pretty satisfying result by the time you're done with it.
And this is a good place. Some people had a question about why you would do this over, whether the advantages over an older computer, maybe running a media server.
The biggest reason is just power consumption. I mean, especially depending on a really old computer, they aren't very efficient, and they just use up a ton of electricity. Whereas a Raspberry Pi is really only going to be using 5 volts and 2 amps, depending on how efficient the wall where you have power in the Raspberry Pi is. That's not going to be drawing too much electricity. And then whatever power supply you need to power your hard drive, which is generally 12 volts and usually the same number of amps. So this is just a much more power efficient way that you can just leave things running. I mean, here in California, electricity is relatively expensive. If you live in a cheap electrical market, maybe that doesn't make a ton of sense for you, and maybe you would rather have the extra horsepower of a full-fledged computer. But if you do live in a place with where the electricity rates are expensive, this is a good option.
And also just space. Like, basically your whole build is the size of this hard drive.
Yep,
this little tiny thing strapped to it.
This is the whole thing.
To like an old tower, even an old slab. Like, you're going to have to find a place to put that behind your couch, and I'm pretty sure you could just tape that to the back of a flat screen TV.
Yeah, with this kind of stuff, the other nice thing is you don't ever, you tend to set this stuff up and largely forget about it. So you don't have to worry about this thing inhaling any dust and anything like that a computer normally would. There's no moving parts on the Raspberry Pi. There's no fans, so it's not drawing in dust. Of course, there are moving parts on the hard drive, but those are all sealed up.
And if your Pi does run hot, you can add optional fans or heat sinks. There are options for that. You can get really cute cases if you want, make it part of your decor.
So anyhow, that's it for this project. We're done. But we're not quite done yet because we, of course, need to thank our friends at DigiKey. Again, if you missed the beginning, this series Make Live is made possible by our friends over there. If you don't know who DigiKey is, they're an electronics distributor based here in the U.S. They sell everything you need for this project. In fact, if you look in the description of this video, if you look in the description of this video, you'll find a shopping cart with all the hardware you need to buy to make this project. Beyond that, they sell everything from microcontrollers, single board computers, hard drive enclosures, all the way down to discrete components like resistors and capacitors. So anything that you need to build your next electronics project, they have it, they'll sell it to you, and they will ship it to you super fast.
So announcements?
Yes.
All right.
Are we doing a thing next weekend?
There's some sort of thing happening next week, and you might have heard us talking about it. Down in San Mateo, in the Bay Area, we're having something called the Maker Faire. And we're all really excited about it. We're here in the studio, we are in full hype mode for Maker Faire. We're so excited this year that we've actually planned a full week of activities called Week of Learning that starts tomorrow with the Space Leadership Unconference over in Oakland at Circuit Launch. And what that is it's a conference for maker spaces, art spaces, hacker spaces, any kind of space leaders or maintainers or organizers who want to go and talk about the problems and challenges that face you, the things that are great about your communities, how to foster community building, and all of that great stuff. So then check that out and all of the great Week of Learning activities. There's tons of workshops on all kinds of skills, blacksmithing, woodworking, electronics, learn how to make an autonomous car, just all kinds of really great stuff. And you can catch all of that on the Maker Faire website.
And if you are here in the Bay Area, please come to Maker Faire Bay Area. It's an incredible event. We've put a ton of work into it. It's going to be even if you've been to Maker Faire before, please come back this year because it is going to be a very different show. There's a ton of changes and a lot of new hands on it. We're really, really excited about this show this year, and we can't wait to see you there. But
and do you want to talk about the DIY content creator stage?
So that's a thing that I was able to get involved with a little bit. If you, a lot of our friends out there who create content on YouTube, they always come out to Maker Faire to hang out with each other. But I'm like, why are they just coming out to hang out with each other? We should be celebrating these people. So we put together a stage for them to do various talks, and a lot of people that we're really excited to be having out there. Let's see, trying to remember who they all are off the top of my head. Well, we've got Bob Claggett, David Picciuto, Steve Ramsey from Woodworking for Mere Mortals, Peter Brown from Shop Time, Evan and Caitlin, of course Laura Kampf is coming all the way out from Germany, and a whole lot of other folks are really excited to have on board there.
And if you checked out our project that we posted yesterday from Maker Faire, Claire Mason from Make and Fake, the YouTube channel, Make and Fake is going to be there.
Yes, along with tons and tons of other people. If you go to makerfaire.com, go to Bay Area and schedule, the schedule there is massive, long, and scary, but if you go to the stage tab, you can select for that individual stage. Look at the DIY content creator stage. You can see the programming there, or in any of the other awesome stages we have at Bay Area Maker Faire. But if you can't make it there, I have good news for you, because we're also going to be running the official Maker Faire broadcast live stream throughout the entire weekend. That is also made possible by our friends at DigiKey. I don't have the studio. I'm still making a couple of tweaks and changes to that schedule, but I'll be getting it published before the weekend. So you can see that on makerfaire.com/live. If you're already a subscriber to our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see it right here, and you can also see it on Facebook as well. So plenty of places to watch that and stay engaged with all the cool stuff that we're going to have at Maker Faire. At least I try to get as much Maker Faire into that live stream as possible. You can't quite do all of it, at least not unless the stream we're going to be lasting for like 5 days. Then we might be able to do it if I never slept. Do we have
two more things. One, we have a book coming out that I'm really excited about called Tips and Tales from the Workshop by one of the prolific Make contributors, Gareth. I am really excited about this because it is packed full of great maker information. We've all contributed. He's been hitting everybody up for their greatest bake tips and workshop tips and tips for the kitchen, everything. That's going to be pre-orders at the end of May on Amazon.com, and then I believe the book comes out on June 3rd.
And if you want a taste of that content, Gareth also publishes a tips column on makescene.com every week, in fact, every Friday. So come back to makescene.com tomorrow and keep an eye out for that. They generally post like in the afternoon or so.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a fun weekly treat that Gareth has for us every week.
So one more thing, which is you may have noticed something sitting up back here. Technically, we're going to talk about this more on Monday, but you guys get a sneak peek here today. We have the newest issue of Make, which I believe is volume 63. I tend to lose track of the numbers because I'm always working like 2 issues ahead. But we are really excited about this. It's jam-packed, full of great projects. There's so many great things in here. And if you join us on Monday, we're going to talk more about it.
Yep. So when is that broadcast going to be happening?
10 a.m. on Monday here
Okay.
on the YouTube channel, I believe.
Yeah, that's 10 a.m. Pacific. So if you do your math for wherever you are in the world, we're going to be talking about the magazine. We're going to be bringing in some of the contributors that wrote articles for the magazine, and we're really excited to see everybody and help kick this magazine off. If you're a subscriber to this magazine, you may have already received it, or you'll be getting it soon. And if you're not a subscriber, hopefully you'll consider being one. But otherwise, you can look for that on newsstands in just a few weeks, wherever you normally get your Make magazine. I think that's all. That's going to do it for us today. I want to thank DigiKey once again for making this series possible. I want to thank you guys for sticking around and watching this and asking us great questions. Of course, thank you, Hep, for helping us out here today and helping out with the questions and everything. And yeah. We'll be seeing you a whole bunch really soon with next Monday with the kickoff of the magazine, and of course at Bay Area Maker Faire. We can't wait to see you there, and otherwise have a great day.
Now remember what I told you.
Yeah, don't make eye contact. He takes it as a personal challenge.
Hello? Pat?
Yes.
Can I get a,
He'll take a Raspberry Pi 3.
No pie for you!
Told you. Hey, but I did hear this new deli. I can go pick up the sandwiches.
Don't be held hostage by the board order. Go to digikey.com to find thousands of boards in stock, all ready for immediate shipment.